Alright, welcome back to our talk on learning. In the first video we talked about learning as a change in behavior, and we're primarily focusing on associative learning, pairing variables together. Earlier we looked at classical conditioning, and now we're going to look at operant conditioning. Now classical conditioning is pretty good at talking about why we do things instinctively. Pavlov rang a bell, made the dogs drool. They didn't even think about it. So they're not processing information on a conscious level. It's instinctual. But it's not very good at explaining voluntary behavior. For example, if you didn't want to go to school today because you were tired, or it was cold, or it was rainy, but you still got up, pulled yourself out of bed, decided to do that. Why? Like, classical conditioning isn't great or not as strong as explaining what those motivations were. And so instead we're going to look to operant conditioning, which is actually pretty easy to understand. It simply says that unlike classical conditioning, where there is a stimulus that elicits a response, in this case, the behavior happens first. So in operant conditioning, you do something, an animal does something, and then either will be rewarded or punished for that behavior. And that's going to change the outcome. This comes from a guy named E.L. Thorndike, who sort of spearheaded part of this operant conditioning sub-movement of behaviorism. And he called it the law of effect. He basically said all animals on this planet operate through this law, which is that if a behavior happens and a good outcome follows, that behavior is strengthened. You're going to see it again. If a behavior happens and a bad outcome happens, then that behavior is weakened. We are less likely to see it again. And it's most easily, or at least most interestingly, analyzed and represented by a researcher named B.F. Skinner, who created several experiments not only on other animals, but even on his own children, to show how the environment conditions us, reinforces, or punishes us. And one of his most classic examples is what's known as the Skinner box. So you have a rat here in a box, and you look at the diagram, you'll notice that there is a switch, a lever, and a place to get food. And so the rat doesn't know this because a rat doesn't know technology, but if the rat hits the bar, food will be dispensed. Now, if you put a rat in this box, they don't know to press levers, but they do know to nose and smell and crawl up on every inch of a new environment. And so they will crawl all around this box. They will accidentally press this bar at some time as they try to crawl out. And once they do, food will appear. Now, they'll eat the food and they'll hang around the hole because they won't know what happened. Eventually, they'll get bored and they'll go back to crawling around this box. At some point in this experiment, they will accidentally touch the bar again as they crawl, and the food will magically appear again. Now, it could take quite a few trials for the rat. It depends on this particular rat that we're talking about. But eventually, that rat will learn that it was when I leaned on this bar that I got food. So basically, we took a behavior that happened first, pressing a bar, and we reinforced it. We rewarded it. A good outcome happened. Food. And believe it or not, rats can learn this so well that in only a few short trials, you put that rat in the box, first thing they do, they walk up, hit the bar, go over the food, wait for the food to come on. That is reinforcement through operant conditioning. Now in this experiment, the rat didn't do it overnight. It didn't happen instantly. This is called shaping, where the rat was rewarded for getting close enough to the behavior. In this case, it was through accident. Though if you ever tried to teach a dog to do a trick, let's say, or try to teach a child to clean the room in the early couple of years, we know they can't do this automatically. They can't do this perfectly. So what do? We reward them for approximate behaviors. The child helps you pick up a toy, which is, as best as they can do at this young age. You reward them for that. Your dog happens to come to you or happens to already be sitting, and you reward him or her in order to start moving towards that trick you want them to do. And little by little, you become more specific of when you give the reward, when you give the positive outcome, until eventually this animal, including us human animals, will do exactly what you want us to do for that reinforcer. And I'm using that word reward and reinforcement. Know that they can be interchangeable. In the world of operant conditioning, there are two variables, reinforcement and punishment. Reinforcement does mean some sort of reward, something that exists in this world, anything you can think of, that increases the chance you will do this behavior again. For example, I clean my room, my parents are happy, they give me my allowance, that's a reinforcer. My dog does a trick, I give him a treat. You do a good job at work, you get praised. Those are all reinforcers. It doesn't have to be something tangible. It just has to be something that increases the chance you will do this behavior again. Now, there are two types of reinforcement: positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement. And I'm cautioning you now, not only do students get this wrong often, I hear people use it incorrectly all the time. The word positive and negative do not mean good or bad, so throw those out. They're math terms. Positive means to add something. Negative means to take something away. But the word reinforcement means, because I like what you're doing, keep doing what you're doing. Positive reinforcement could be, here's a treat, here's some praise, here's some money. I am giving you things because I like what you're doing. Keep doing what you're doing. Negative reinforcement is when I see missed. I'll hear people say, spanking shouldn't be used because it's negative reinforcement. No, it's not. That's wrong. Spanking is punishment. That's something completely different. Negative reinforcement is taking something away because you like what they're doing. Keep doing what they're doing. Some examples might be, perhaps your kid made all A's, so you take away his chores. Maybe your team won the game, and so you take away the laps they have to run. Or, every time I take medicine, assuming it works, it takes away my pain, and I am reinforced to take medicine again next time. That's negative reinforcement. Now, there's a special type of negative reinforcement called avoidance learning, and that means that if there is a particularly bad thing that is existing, and we do a behavior that takes that very bad thing away, our behavior can change for years. So let's say that you failed a class. You made your first F and you've never had that full F before and it feels terrible. And so in your next class, you decide, I'm never going to let this happen again. I can't have it happen. I feel too bad. So you change something. Maybe you study in a new way. You say, I now study 15 minutes every night before bed. And so let's say you adopt that new strategy. And in the next class you pass it. You get an A. And in the next class you get an A. And in the third class you get an A. And over the next 3 years you get A's. Well, it turns out you will still keep studying in that manner because that bad thing was so bad, that one behavior took it away, that you're going to keep doing that behavior. Now, unfortunately, with avoidance learning, we can't always see that solution. Sometimes it fails, and that's called learned helplessness. This is a pretty famous experiment, not a happy one, from Seligman and dogs, where he put single dogs in a box. And in this box, there was no way out. And several times a day, he would flip a switch, and the floor would turn to electricity, and would shock the dogs. And the dogs could whine, they could claw, they could jump, but they cannot get out of these boxes. So for several days, these dogs are simply shocked every day with nothing they can do. And the second part of the experiment, he put a new group of dogs in a box like the one you see on the screen. He turned on the electric floor, and all of these first-time dogs scrambled out of the box, jumping through that hole that you see there. But in the second group, he put the old dogs that had been shocked every day. He put them in this new box on the screen. He turned on the electricity, and the dogs just laid down. They didn't try to escape. They didn't jump out. They just sat there and took it. Why? Because the sad truth was they had learned helplessness. In their previous experience with an electric floor, there was nothing you could do. There was no way out. Many of us have seen the same phenomenon in people. Think about those in abusive relationships where on the outside we say, just leave, just get out of there. But those people will tell you, there is no way out. Like, this is the best it's going to be. This is the best I will do. And so I will just take the bad parts and hope there are enough good parts. That's learned helplessness. An unfortunate but very real situation. Now, we said that reinforcement can be anything on the planet, any stimuli that can increase the chance you'll do something again. I'm going to put all of those things into two simple categories. Primary reinforcers are those which are biological. They're unlearned. They simply are reinforcing because that's the way we're wired. We all want food. All animals want food, sustenance, sleep, shelter, and even sex, though yes, sex can be done for recreation, for pleasure, for romance, for intimacy. Ultimately, since it's a biological process built into us, It's a primary reinforcer. Anything that we had to learn to want, that's a secondary reinforcer. If you say money motivates you, fine. But money is not a thing in nature. It doesn't exist. We invented money, a concept to help us create a system of trade. And so you have to learn what money is before it can be reinforcing. Now in the previous video on this chapter, we learned about generalization, discrimination, extinction, and spontaneous recovery. Those words are all the same right now. The only difference is we're going to change the name of the variable that we need to alter. We said in classical conditioning, you can have a neutral stimulus that becomes a conditioned stimulus, like the bell. But what if you brought in a different bell? Well, if it's close enough, the dogs will generalize, and they'll still do the response. Same for reinforcement. If the reinforcer is close enough to what you taught them with, they'll still do it. Discrimination works the same way. If the reinforcer is not close enough to being a positive outcome, then no, not going to get the behavior. And how do you make the behavior go away once you teach it? Just stop reinforcing. Eventually, that behavior can, and sometimes does, disappear. Now, sometimes in life, we're reinforced by coincidence. Like we just happened to do something that should not have given us reinforcement, but it did. And that may also alter our behavior. That helps explain superstitions. Some men and women, some of you who are athletes might be aware of this, have some very unique superstitions. And at a rational level, we know these actually do not work. There's no magical force, right? Wearing unwashed socks, eating Taco Bell before the big game, wearing that lucky necklace, those truly aren't changing the outcome of the game. But it doesn't matter, because our brain is always looking for patterns. And so if you play your first game and win, and then you play your second game and win, your brain's going to look for, what did you do the same? What patterns can I find? And who knows what you'll stumble on, but maybe you do say, well, in front of the last two games, I ate Taco Bell before I played the game. So that must be my thing. So the third game comes, you eat Taco Bell, and surprise, your team wins. Now, did eating Taco Bell really help your team win? Absolutely not. But you were reinforced. You did it. You got a positive outcome. Now you're more likely to do it again. Now, I want to wrap up our talk on reinforcement by talking about when we get reinforcers. We don't always get reinforced for every single action we do. That's actually pretty rare, certainly in our adult life, but through most of life as well. So instead we have partial reinforcers. Sometimes we get the rewards. I don't get paid to come to work every day. Those paychecks come eventually. But I'm not conditioned, or I'm not responding to that conditioned response of come every day, get a reward every day. It's not how it works. So I'm going to show you 4 types of reinforcement, types of partial reinforcers. And then I'm going to show you at the end which one of these gets the most responses. You might be surprised. The first one's called fixed interval. It's pretty easy. The word fixed means always the same. The word interval means time. So in this example, you will get your reward at the same time every time. Let's go back to the Skinner box, the rat in the box. I can program that switch so that when the rat hits the bar and gets his food, he must wait 5 minutes. The bar doesn't do anything until 5 minutes has passed. Believe it or not, a rat can learn that. They will hit the bar, they will wait roughly 5 minutes, 4 minutes-ish, and then they'll step up and start hitting the bar, expecting it to turn on any minute now. In this case, any second now. And as long as it's always a 5-minute delay, it's fixed, they can learn this. And if you want a human example, the one I gave you earlier, paychecks works. I don't get paid every day, but I get paid at the same time. If you guys get paid every 2 weeks, that's fixed interval. There's also one, though, called variable interval. Variable means always changing. Could be anything. And as we said, interval means time. So, in the Skinner box example, I can program it so when the rat hits the box, he has to wait 5 minutes for the switch to work again. But the next time the switch comes on and the rat presses it, he now has to wait 7 minutes. And after that goes, he now has to wait 3 minutes. See what's happening? It's all over the place. It's random. And of these 2 examples, do you know which one will have the rat pressing the bar the most? It's this one, variable interval. The rat will stand at the bar and just go, now, 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 because there's no pattern. There's nothing to learn. It's random. It's all over the place. Our third example is fixed ratio. You already know the word fixed. It means always the same. But the word ratio doesn't mean time. It means number of responses, behaviors. So a fixed ratio example in that Skinner box would be press the bar exactly 10 times and your food comes out. And assuming that pattern holds true, rats absolutely can learn this. They'll step up, go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Then they'll go step to their food and wait for it to come. They can learn that pattern. But that's different from variable ratio. And you know all those words. Variable means could be anything and it's always changing. So the rat hits the bar 10 times, but now the computer says click, hit it 15 times. And now the computer says click, now you only have to hit it 5 times. And in that example, like with variable interval, the rat's just going to press the bar all day long because it can't figure it out. There's no discernible pattern. And so I said earlier, which one of these will produce the most responses? As you might can guess, it's one of the variables. And in studies, we find that it just ekes out, but variable ratio is the strongest. And we know this because casinos. If any of you play the slot machines, congratulations, you are being conditioned to respond on a variable ratio scale, just like the rat in the box. Because in a slot machine, it says you have to press a certain number of times or pull a certain number of times. But we're not going to tell you how many, and it's always going to change. At some time you will get rewarded, and then it's going to change again. And guess what? Like the rats in the box, we will stand up and we'll go now, 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 because it works. All right, so we're going to stop there. When we come back, we're still going to talk about operant conditioning, but we're going to look at the other side, talk about punishment. We'll also wrap up the chapter with just a quick mention of a few other types of learning we can discuss. See you then.